I said show ID now. I'm authorized here. Step back. You're out of line. You don't belong. Call your supervisor.
This is the moment that will cost him everything. Not just the badge clipped to his chest, not just the job he believes he owns, but a reputation burned into court transcripts, a name whispered in training rooms as a warning, and a lawsuit that will crawl past $16 million before it's done feeding. And the most dangerous part? He doesn't know it yet. The officer stands rigid in the lobby of a federal building that hums with quiet authority. Marble floors, controlled access. The kind of place where power doesn't shout, it assumes. His posture is stiff, chin slightly raised, eyes already convinced they're in the right. This is his terrain now. At least that's what he's decided. Across from him stands a man who does not match the script the officer has written in his head. The subject is calm, immaculately composed. His suit is tailored, his voice measured, his hands relaxed at his sides. No nervous energy, no flinching. The kind of stillness that unnerves men who rely on command presence to dominate a room. "I said ID," the officer snaps again, louder this time. Notice what's already happened beneath the surface. This isn't about identification anymore. It's about hierarchy, about who gets to decide who belongs. The subject exhales slowly, not a sigh, a calculation. "I'm authorized to be here," he says. "You are escalating for no reason." That sentence lands like a slap, because every 45 seconds from this point forward, the officer is stacking risk onto his own career, each word another brick in a wall that will later be dismantled in front of a jury. The officer's jaw tightens as his authority is questioned. Not denied, questioned. That's the trigger. The ego doesn't roar, it sharpens. "Step back," the officer says. "You don't tell me how to do my job." There it is, the shift, the moment this stops being a lawful interaction and becomes personal. The subject doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't mirror aggression. Instead, he does something far more dangerous to an arrogant officer. He stands his ground. "I'm not stepping anywhere," he replies. "I work for the Department of Defense. You're out of line." That word, defense, hangs in the air. This is where a smart officer pauses, reassesses, verifies, calls it in, but arrogance hates breaks. The officer scoffs. A short, dismissive sound, the kind meant to belittle. "Everyone works for something," he says. "That doesn't make you special." What he doesn't realize is that this dismissal will later be replayed in slow, surgical detail. Prosecutors will dissect it. Civil attorneys will frame it. Trainers will freeze this exact second and ask recruits, what should he have done differently? The subject's eyes narrow, not in anger but resolve. "You're profiling me," he says evenly, "and you know it." Now the danger multiplies, because bias once spoken aloud becomes radioactive. The officer's voice hardens. "You want to play that card? Play. Card. Language matters, especially when it reveals intent." "I want you to follow policy," the subject replies, "instead of your ego." That's the strike. The officer shifts his weight forward, invading space, a predatory step masked as procedure. "Hands where I can see them," he orders. Why is this moment lethal for the officer's career? Because there is no threat, no furtive movement, no lawful basis that will survive scrutiny, only wounded pride masquerading as command. The subject slowly raises his hands, not in surrender, but compliance without submission. His dignity is intact. That's what makes it unbearable. "You're making a serious mistake," the subject says. "This building knows who I am." The officer laughs, a short, humorless sound. "Then you won't mind proving it," he fires back. What the officer doesn't see, but the audience will, is the imbalance of real power. One man carries a gun and a badge. The other carries institutional gravity, legal insulation, and a memory that reaches far beyond this lobby. The subject turns his head slightly toward a security desk down the hall. "Call your supervisor," he says, "right now." That sentence is a lifeline for the officer, and a threat. And the officer hesitates just long enough to be fatal. His radio crackles softly at his shoulder. He ignores it. "No," he says, "you don't get to control this." That refusal will echo, because supervisors don't just bring oversight. They bring witnesses, and witnesses bring consequences. The subject's voice lowers, steady and unshakable. "Then you're choosing how this ends." The radio crackles again, louder this time. A dispatcher's voice bleeds through. "Unit 214, confirm status." The officer finally reaches for the radio, and in that half-second, before he answers, everything hangs in the balance. Badge, job, millions. The line is already crossed. The radio doesn't just crackle, it intrudes. A thin, metallic voice cuts through the silence. And for the first time since this encounter began, the officer is no longer alone inside his own authority. "Unit 214, status check." That's the sound of accountability arriving early. The officer presses the button a beat too late, his thumb lingering as if he's reconsidering the truth in real time. His eyes never leave the man in front of him. "Yeah," he says, "I've got an uncooperative individual refusing to identify himself." Notice the framing. Not confusion, not verification, uncooperative. Every 45 seconds now, the officer is actively building the narrative that will be used against him, and he's doing it in his own voice. The subject doesn't interrupt. He doesn't argue. He simply turns slightly, angling his body so the radio can hear him too. "That's not accurate," he says calmly. "I've identified my role." You're refusing to verify it." The officer snaps his head toward him. "You don't talk over my radio." That line will matter later, because it reveals something crucial. The officer doesn't see the radio as a tool. He sees it as a weapon, one that only he's allowed to fire. The dispatcher pauses, a silence that feels deliberate. "Unit 214. The voice returns, slower now. "Do you require a supervisor?" The officer exhales sharply through his nose. His jaw tightens again. That micro-expression, the one he thinks no one notices, is the sound of control slipping. "No," he says. "Not yet." Not yet. That hesitation will cost him more than compliance ever would have. The subject's hands are still raised, but his posture is unchanged. Upright, balanced, dignified. This is not submission. It's strategy. He understands something the officer doesn't. Time is on his side. "I'm requesting a supervisor," the subject says clearly. "On record." The officer steps closer, voice dropping. "You're not in charge here." And there it is again, ego disguised as enforcement. The subject meets his eyes. "Neither are you." That exchange is electric, not because it's loud, but because it's true. The officer turns away abruptly, pacing 2 steps as if movement might restore dominance. He keys the radio again. "Dispatch, send a supervisor." Too late to sound confident now. The words land flat. While they wait, something shifts in the room. Security personnel down the corridor have stopped pretending not to watch. A federal employee lingers by the elevator longer than necessary. Quiet witnesses collecting context. The officer senses it. He straightens his vest, reasserts his stance. You still haven't shown ID, he says, trying to rewind time. The subject lowers his hands slowly, deliberately. "Because I'm not required to. And you know that." That sentence is lethal, because it challenges not just the officer's authority, but his competence. The officer scoffs again, but the sound is thinner now. "You think you're above the law?" "No," the subject replies. "I think you're beneath policy." That's when the officer's face changes. Not anger. Something worse. Fear. Because policy is measurable. Policy can be cited. Policy doesn't care about tone or intent. Policy either holds or it doesn't. The elevator dings behind them. A uniformed supervisor steps out, scanning the scene in seconds. He reads posture, distance, tension. His eyes land on the subject first. "Sir," the supervisor says. "Oh, what seems to be the issue?" The officer opens his mouth, but the subject speaks first. "I'm a Pentagon official assigned to this building," he says evenly. "Your officer detained me without cause and escalated after I asserted my authorization." The supervisor turns to the officer. Just a look. No accusation, no agreement. "Is that accurate?" he asks. This is the most dangerous question of the night, because now the officer must choose between ego and survival. "It's not," the officer says quickly. He refused to identify himself. The supervisor nods once, then looks back at the subject. "Sir, can you verify your credentials?" The subject reaches slowly into his jacket, not toward his wallet, but his phone. He unlocks it, turns the screen outward, and hands it to the supervisor. An internal directory, official seals, clearance identifiers. The supervisor's eyes flick across the screen, then up at the subject. His expression tightens, not in suspicion, but recognition. "Yes," the subject says. "I belong here." That sentence ends the argument. The supervisor hands the phone back. "Thank you, sir." Then he turns, fully, to the officer. "Step aside," he says quietly. Those two words are heavier than any raised voice. The officer obeys, automatically. Every 45 seconds, another irreversible consequence clicks into place. The supervisor lowers his voice. "What was your probable cause?" The officer swallows. "Suspicious behavior." The supervisor blinks once. "Explain." He wouldn't comply. "With what?" "Identification." "In a controlled access federal building," the supervisor says slowly. "What with visible credentials?" The officer's silence answers for him. Around them, the building breathes again. The tension drains, but the damage is already permanent. "Sir," the supervisor says to the subject, "you're free to go. I apologize for the inconvenience." The subject straightens his jacket, smoothing a wrinkle near the lapel. His composure never broke, and that's why it worked. "I'll be filing a complaint," he says, not as a threat, as a fact. The supervisor nods. "Understood." The subject walks away without another glance. The officer watches him go, chest tight, pulse loud in his ears. He doesn't yet know about the investigation, the emails, the internal review board, the body cam footage that will be slowed, captioned, and played in a courtroom. He doesn't know that within months, and his name will be attached to a $16 million lawsuit, one that will argue bias, unlawful detention, and abuse of authority. But he will, because this wasn't just a bad stop. It was a career-ending mistake, born from arrogance, and witnessed by everyone who mattered. The hallway swallows the subject whole, polished floors, muted footsteps, power returning to silence. Behind him, the officer remains frozen where the supervisor left him, physically present, professionally exposed. The adrenaline that once fueled his confidence now curdles into something heavier. Dread. Because this is the phase no body cam prepares you for, the waiting. The supervisor doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't scold. That restraint is intentional. Discipline delivered calmly cuts deeper and lasts longer. "Turn your camera off," the supervisor says. The officer hesitates, then obeys. That single instruction confirms what the officer has been avoiding since the moment the radio crackled. This is no longer routine. This is administrative. This is institutional. Every 45 seconds now, the consequences stop being hypothetical. "Walk with me," the supervisor adds. They move toward a side corridor, away from witnesses but not away from record. The building has its own memory, access logs, security feeds, entry scans. Every step the officer took tonight is already documented somewhere he doesn't control. The supervisor stops near a glass wall overlooking the lobby. "Tell me why you escalated," he says. The officer opens his mouth, then closes it. He searches for language that will sound reasonable in hindsight. "He challenged me," the officer finally says. The supervisor nods once. And? "He refused to show ID." The supervisor turns, slow and deliberate. "Did you have cause to demand it?" The officer looks away. That micro-movement, the same one juries are trained to notice, will be replayed later in depositions. "I believed he didn't belong," the officer says. Believed, not knew. Belief is not a legal standard, it's a liability. The supervisor exhales. "You understand who that man is?" The officer stiffens. "I do now." "No," the supervisor replies. "You understood the moment he said where he worked, and you chose not to verify." That's the pivot point. Not ignorance, not confusion. Choice. The supervisor continues. "You didn't lose control. You exercised it poorly." That sentence will echo louder than any reprimand. Down the hall, a door closes softly. Somewhere, an email is already being drafted. Somewhere else, a complaint form is being time-stamped. Institutions don't move fast, but once they move, they don't stop. The officer swallows hard. What happens now? The supervisor doesn't answer immediately. "Now," he says finally, "you're relieved from duty for the remainder of the shift." The officer's heart drops, not dramatically, but with weight. This isn't suspension. This is prelude. "You'll turn in your weapon," the supervisor adds, "and you'll be contacted by Internal Affairs." Internal Affairs. 3 words that don't accuse, but imply everything. The officer nods, numb. He hands over the firearm. The transfer is quiet, procedural, dehumanizing. As he walks toward the exit, something else sets in. The story is no longer his. By morning, the footage will be requested. By afternoon, it will be reviewed. By nightfall, it will be duplicated. He preserved, protected. And weeks from now, attorneys will study it frame by frame, not for what happened, but why. They will pause at the first command, the first scoff, the first refusal to de-escalate. They will ask, what alternatives did he have? And the answer will be devastating. Across town, the subject sits in an office bathed in fluorescent calm. He removes his jacket, places it carefully over the back of a chair, and exhales for the first time since the encounter began. His phone vibrates. A message from counsel. "We're moving forward." This isn't anger driving him, it's principle. Because dignity, once challenged publicly, demands response. Over the next months, the case takes shape. Not as outrage, but as architecture. Carefully built, methodical, unshakable. Depositions are scheduled. The officer sits under oath for the first time, realizing how different authority feels when it's questioned by someone who doesn't flinch. "Why didn't you call a supervisor immediately? Why did you escalate? Why did you dismiss his explanation?" Each answer digs deeper. "I felt, I assumed, I believed." Words that collapse under scrutiny. Emails surface, training manuals, department policy, expert testimony on bias, not as accusation, but pattern. The bodycam footage becomes central, not because it shows violence, but because it shows tone, entitlement, insolence, a refusal to listen. Jurors don't need explosions, they need contrast, and the contrast is brutal. On one side, a calm, professional official asserting his right to exist unchallenged in his own workplace, and on the other, an officer who confused compliance with respect and authority with infallibility. When the settlement discussions begin, the number shocks the department. 8 figures, $16 million, not because of injury, but because of erosion, trust, credibility, legitimacy. The officer is offered early retirement, quiet separation, no admission of wrongdoing, just absence. He takes it. The badge is turned in permanently. No ceremony, no send-off, just a file closed and a name archived. Years later, recruits will watch the footage during training. The instructor will pause the video at the moment the officer says, "You don't get to decide that." And they'll ask the room a simple question: who actually had the power here? No one answers immediately, because the lesson isn't comfortable. Power doesn't come from volume, or posture, or a badge alone. It comes from restraint, and the failure to recognize that difference ended a career, reshaped a department, and cost millions. Not in a flash, but in a moment where ego spoke first, and policy watched silently.